Well, good morning and welcome back, my friends, as we continue in our journey together through the book of Matthew. This week's chapter starts in Matthew 16, and it really deals with the big questions of life, and really the large number one, giant, flashing ones. Question of life that really matters most, and that is who was Jesus and what do we do with him? But the truth is, if you're like me, I think most of us spend the bulk of our lives not asking the big questions. We just kind of run around with our nose to the grindstone, pedal to the metal, and we just go about the basics of daily life. We don't stop and think about the larger questions. Usually we'll just ask, what's the next Netflix show we can binge, which is kind of a sad state in our everyday comings and goings, but we don't often ask ourselves the big burning questions. We don't consider the larger, more ominous questions. We don't ask ourselves, will someone love me? Will someone really love me in this life? Who will push my wheelchair when I'm old? What is the purpose of my life on this earth? Am I more than just a ball of doing? Who am I really deep down? These are the larger questions that we ask ourselves. This morning's message touches on the single greatest question that we will ask ourselves this side of eternity. Who is Jesus and what do I do with him? But as we dive into this, I realize that big questions can be scary. I remember when, way back when I asked my wife to marry me, 25 years ago this August, we got married. So it's been 25 years since I worked up the nerve to ask her to be my bride. And I was pretty nervous when I asked her because, it's a big question. I had my heart set on marrying Carrie Robertson. But I really didn't know if she felt the same way. And so I kind of put some feelers out there a little bit, like, if I was to ask you to marry me, what do you think you'd say? I'm pretty subtle like that. And my future wife said to me in no uncertain terms, I would say no, I'm too young to be married. Because she was 18, 19 years old when we were having these discussions. Well, I really wanted to marry her, and I was ready to be married, so I wasn't sure what the next step was to do, so I decided I'd ask her dad if he had any insight, if he knew any little bit of something. He knew her better than I did at that point, so maybe he knew some way of asking or something about her that would be less confusing. Because when I did ask her if she wanted to marry me, she would say things like, yes, I do, but not now. Kind of sending mixed messages. Wasn't quite the messages I was looking for when I was getting ready to go out and buy a ring for my soon-to-be bride. Well, we had dinner, Greg and I, and we talked about a lot of things regarding my wife, my future wife, but he was zero help. Sorry, Greg. He was zero help in trying to unravel the mystery that was Carrie. Which isn't really now, looking back, all that much of a mystery. She did want to marry me. She just felt like she was too young to be married, and marriage was something that you do when you're old. It was a long way off. But ultimately, I worked up the nerve. I bought the ring. I took that leap of faith, and I asked the woman that I loved more than anything else in this world if she would marry me. There at Tillicum Camp outside of Newburgh, where we went on our first date, I got down on one knee in the dank mud of the camp and proposed right there, and without hesitation my wife said yes. Sometimes we just have to work up the courage to ask the big questions. Sometimes we have to prepare ourselves. If Jesus has prepared his disciples for what's to come and they still don't get it, and they won't get it until after his resurrection, they won't get what's going on. There's a lot of different ideas about Jesus swirling around, and so Jesus takes the opportunity to get his disciples on the same page. We pick up our story this morning in chapter 16, starting with verse 13. And it says this: when Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that the Son of Man is?" Well, they replied, some say John the Baptist, some say Elijah, and others say Jeremiah or one of the other prophets. Then he asked them, but who do you say that I am? Simon Peter answered, you're the Messiah, the Son of the living God. Jesus replied, you are blessed, Simon, son of John, because my Father in heaven has revealed this to you. You did not learn this from any human being. Now I say to you that you are Peter, which means rock. And upon this rock I will build my church, and all the powers of hell will not conquer it. And I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you forbid on earth will be forbidden in heaven, and whatever you permit on earth will be permitted in heaven. And then he sternly warned the disciples not to tell anyone that he was the Messiah. All right, let's dive into this a little bit this morning, shall we? So Jesus starts out and he takes them north, far north, up out of Galilee, to a Gentile town called Caesarea Philippi, the very far north of Israel. And here Jesus is away from Herod, he's away from Galilee, he's away from Jerusalem, and so he gathers his disciples up and he asks them a seemingly innocent question. Who are the people saying that I am? And he gets various responses coming back. Everything from the recently deceased John the Baptist to a throwback Old Testament prophet. This is all well and good because people are always going to make their minds up about Jesus. And great minds have come up with great different opinions of Jesus. Mohandas Gandhi wrote in his autobiography, Experiments in Truth. He said, it was more than I could believe that Jesus was the only incarnate Son of God, that only he who believed in him would have everlasting life. My reason was not ready to believe literally that Jesus by his death and by his blood redeemed the sins of the world. I could accept Jesus as a martyr, an embodiment of sacrifice and divine teacher, but not as the most perfect man ever born. His death on the cross was a great example to the world, but that there was anything like a mysterious or miraculous virtue in it, my heart could not accept. What do we do with Jesus? Peter says, you're the Messiah, the Son of God. The great thinker and writer C.S. Lewis once said about Jesus that he had to be either the world's greatest liar, a lunatic, or he really was who he said he was, Lord. In thinking through Lewis's thought process there, he says, a charlatan and a liar seems like a bit of a stretch because what kind of charlatan would sacrifice himself for other people? There were so many times Jesus could have just packed it in and lived a life of obscurity, gone back to Galilee, gone back to Nazareth, taken his carpentry tools back up again and began his life, married, settled down, had a family. There were all kinds of things that he could have done. There were opportunities to say no, to turn around, to get off the train, to get off the boat of where he was headed, this collision course between Jesus and the Pharisees and Sadducees and the temple leaders, and ultimately the Romans. But a charlatan doesn't do that. A charlatan doesn't lie to people for selfless gains. They lie to people for selfish gains, and we realize this. And so when you put that mantle over Jesus and the Jesus that we know, it doesn't seem like Jesus was the kind of man that was a charlatan. He doesn't seem like that kind of false man because he had many opportunities to back down, and he doesn't do it. Instead, Jesus dies, and I just don't see Jesus dying for a lie. It could have been that he was just crazy. It could have been that he was just deluded, that he was like the person on the street corner who thinks that they're the Son of God. Maybe Jesus too thought that he was the Son of God in a delusional way, or that he was some chosen one, some chosen Messiah. But being a lunatic doesn't really explain the kinds of things that Jesus said and inspiring people the way that Jesus did. We're normally not drawn to madness as far as inspiration. We recognize people that are a little off their rockers, and we don't go to them looking for life advice. Now, and this is just a part of whether or not you believe in the miracles of Jesus as evidence of his claim or not. It doesn't seem like Jesus acts the way that a deluded person or a lunatic would have acted. No one taught the kinds of things, said the kinds of things, had the kind of message, the kind of cohesive message that Jesus had that changed so many lives. I just don't see that Jesus was a lunatic. And if he wasn't a liar and he wasn't a lunatic, then the only other option left was that he really was who he said he was, and Jesus Christ was the Son of Man, which was the title that he used for himself. He was the Messiah, the chosen one, the long-awaited King of Israel, and he was the Son of God. And that title, Son of God, is kind of interesting here in the text, because at this point in their journey before the resurrection, we're still a couple weeks before the resurrection, and in this part of their journey, we don't really see that train just left the station. Sorry, we'll come back to that. The most bizarre and yet most likely explanation is that Jesus is who he says he is, and that should be both immensely reassuring and incredibly terrifying. It's reassuring because if Jesus reflects God to us, then we're in good hands. It's terrifying because the creator of all, the ultimate cause of the universe, wants to know us and be known by us. The disciples will share the truth about Jesus with the rest of the world after his crucifixion and resurrection. But the real question isn't what other people are saying about Jesus. No, the real question that he lays to his disciples is, who do they think that he is? Who do they think that he is? Because these are the people that have seen Jesus in action, who've eaten and slept and lived with him for a couple of years now. Who is he in the minds and hearts of those who knew him best? Going back a little bit to that part that my brain froze on, when Peter says, "You're the Son of God," that's a little bit different. They're pre-resurrection. They don't really begin to get what it meant for Jesus to be the Son of God, actually part of God. That's more, again, of a title that they're throwing out here. But they won't realize how true that title is until after the resurrection. That there really was something of God in Jesus, the most perfect man. Peter steps up to be the spokesperson for the group, and he declares that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of the living God. What did it mean for Jesus to be Messiah? Well, it meant that he was the long-awaited king who would deliver Israel and ultimately the world. Most people thought of the Messiah as a kind of a warrior king, a king kind of like David, but far greater than David. And Jesus doesn't fit the bill of what people are expecting in a Messiah. He isn't there to save them from Rome. So this question of who do people say that I am, and then who do you say that I am, is incredibly important. Because the disciples have to recognize the fullness of why Jesus came, because time is getting short. And he's going to begin teaching them about all the ways that he has to go to Jerusalem and suffer and ultimately die. And we'll get into that in just a little bit. I'm jumping ahead. I don't want to jump ahead. We oftentimes want to make Jesus into our version of Jesus. It's really the very opposite, really. Rather than Jesus changing us into little versions of himself, we change Jesus into little versions of us. The question is, who do you say that I am? And too oftentimes, instead of allowing ourselves to answer with Peter, you're the Christ, the Son of God, the Messiah, we make Jesus into what we want Jesus to be. There's a Republican Jesus who's against tax increases and activist judges and for family values and owning firearms. There's a Democrat Jesus who's against Wall Street and Walmart and for reducing our carbon footprint and spending other people's money. There's therapist Jesus who helps us cope with life's problems, heals our past, and tells us how valuable we are and not to be so hard on ourselves. There's Starbucks Jesus who drinks fair trade coffee, loves spiritual conversations, drives a hybrid, and goes to film festivals. There's open-minded Jesus who loves everyone all the time no matter what, except for people who are not as open-minded as you. There's touchdown Jesus who helps athletes run faster and jump higher than non-Christians and determines the outcome of Super Bowls. There's gentle Jesus, who is meek and mild, with high cheekbones, flowing hair, and walks around barefoot, wearing a sash and looks vaguely German. There's hippie Jesus, who teaches everyone to give peace a chance. Imagine a world without religion, and helps us all remember that all you need is love. Then there's yuppie Jesus, who encourages us to reach our full potential, to reach for the stars, and to buy a boat. There's platitude Jesus, good for Christmas specials, greeting cards, and bad sermons. He inspires people to believe in themselves, and he lifts us up so we can walk on mountains. There's revolutionary Jesus, who teaches us to rebel against the status quo, stick it to the man, and dream up impossible utopian schemes. There's good example Jesus, who shows you how to help people change the planet and become a better you. All these versions of Jesus come from Kevin DeYoung's book, Who Do You Say That I Am? And in none of these Jesuses do I find anything compelling. These little micro Jesuses that we make up, I don't find them compelling at all. What I find compelling me to ask the question, who is Jesus to me now, is the Jesus that leaps off the pages of the gospel and offers his life for mine. The Jesus that I find compelling is the one who died for my sin and for yours, and who's proven his love to me over and over again in this life. That's the kind of Jesus, the Jesus of the Gospels. I don't want some watered down, false Jesus that I kind of have created in my own mind. I want the real thing. I don't want Jesus to come into my life and be changed by me. I want my life to be changed by Jesus coming into my life. Because ultimately, I want to be more like this Jesus that I read about in the Gospels, who loves us in spite of everything that we do, and who's there for us, and whose grace is prevalent for us in every situation of life. I remember going to preview The Passion of the Christ when I was a youth pastor in Quincy. I went to preview the movie because I'd made the mistake before in the past of going and taking kids to movies, and there, there'd always be something in the movie that I didn't see or didn't see coming, or didn't think was a big deal, that some kid or some parents did think was a big deal. And so I went to preview The Passion of the Christ because it was an R-rated movie, because of how violent it was, and we needed to figure out if it was okay to take these kids to see The Passion. Or maybe it was PG-13. It's a violent movie. That's all I remember. Well, not all I remember. I remember the movie. If you haven't seen it yet, here's a spoiler alert. They kill Jesus. But the beauty of that film and the way they captured the suffering of Jesus, it draws you in and it brings something out in us. I went to the theater to check it out in Ephrata, a little Lee theater there, and it was packed the night that I went. Absolutely packed out. And so I had to sit kind of down near the front, and luckily I was by myself. There was just one seat open that I got to, because I hate showing up early to movies. And so I got stuck in between a kind of a rough-looking crowd, some pretty rough dudes, and I heard them before the movie talking, and these were not youth group folks. They were rough and tumble, and I felt a little bit uncomfortable, and part of me wondered what they were doing here and what they were doing watching this movie. By the end of the movie, you could hear a pin drop. And as the lights came on and we got up to leave, I saw tough guys around me drying their eyes as quickly as they could. Others that were just sitting kind of shell-shocked, stunned. Because there's something so beautiful and so poignant in that movie that draws us to Jesus, that draws us to love this man who came and gave himself and died for us. Because I think that no matter who you are, there's something that we need, there's something that our hearts long for in Jesus. I think we need someone to tell us that we're truly loved and then back it up with their sacrifice, to redeem our sin and our failures and bring some good out of them. I think we need someone that loves us unconditionally, and to know that we have been made right with God, that we aren't distant and separated from God anymore. I think there's something in our hearts that needs to know this. It's like the French philosopher Blaise Pascal said. He said, it's as though we are all made with a God-shaped hole in our hearts that can only truly be filled by Christ. Let me say that again. It's as though that we are all made with a God-shaped hole in our hearts that can only be filled by Christ. We try to fill it with all these other things that we think will make us happy, that we think will satisfy us, and yet nothing in this life truly does until we find our home in Christ. We try to fill it up with our work, with our family, with our pursuits, but there's only one perfect fit, only one thing that truly satisfies, and that is Jesus. So going back to our scripture, Jesus commends Peter, kind of. He says, you didn't hear this from anyone, God revealed it to you. In other words, this isn't something he picked up from the people, the crowd, that have said all these different things about Jesus. And Jesus changes Simon's name to Peter, or Rock. And he makes the claim that he'll build his church on Peter and his confession. And then he warns the disciples not to tell anyone yet about Jesus being the Messiah. Jesus and Messiah will get him and everyone with him killed if the news got out into the wrong hands. And he's aware of this. Jesus is going to go on and warn them that he must go to Jerusalem and be killed there by the Pharisees and the priesthood that he is so clearly challenged in his ministry. Peter takes his newfound authority from Jesus, this newfound place that Jesus has given him a new name, and pulls him aside for a little talking to, and he rebukes Jesus for talking about these things and saying, surely this won't happen to you. Jesus, in return, calls him Satan and rebukes him for suggesting that the Messiah would suffer any of these things. So is this Jesus just being paranoid or ignorant? No, he says. He tells Peter that no, Peter's only seeing things from the human perspective. He's only seeing things the way that he wants to see them. He's not really seeing things from God's perspective. And then he says in verse 24, then Jesus said to his disciples, if any of you wants to be my follower, you must give up your own life, take up your cross, and follow me. If you try to hang on to your life, you'll lose it. But if you give up your life for my sake, you'll save it. And what do you benefit if you gain the whole world but lose your own soul? Is anything worth more than your soul? For the Son of Man will come with his angels in the glory of his Father and will judge all people according to their deeds. I don't know where you're at today in your journey with Jesus, but I know for myself I find it really helpful to go back to the beginning and reacquaint myself with what it's all about. What good is it to gain the whole world and yet lose your soul? This morning I invite you to recommit your heart and your life to the Lord so that we can proclaim with joy that Jesus is the most important answer to the only question that really matters. Why am I here? The only question that really matters is why am I here? And the only way to answer that question is by answering the question that Jesus asks, who do you say that I am? Because who we say Jesus is will determine the entire outcome of our life from here through eternity. Jesus waits for us, and he longs to be with us. We need to be asking ourselves the right kinds of questions, not just get caught up in the daily grind. Our time is too precious. Our lives are too short to be caught up in this merry-go-round of life, never to stop and ask ourselves about the things that really, truly matter. So this morning I invite you to that, to reacquaint yourself with Jesus in a fresh way, to ask yourself the things that really matter. What am I doing here? What's my purpose? What does Jesus have in store for me? All right, I brought a song for us this morning. It's "Oh, Praise the Name." entrance sealed by heavy stone. Messiah still and all alone. Oh, praise the name of the Lord our God. Oh, praise His name forevermore. For endless days we will sing Your praise, oh Lord our God. Then on the third, at break of dawn, the Son of Heaven rose again. Oh, trampled death, where is your sting? The angels roar for Christ the King. Oh, praise the name of the Lord our God. Oh, praise His name forevermore. For endless days we will sing Your praise, oh Lord our God. He shall return in robes of white. The blazing sun shall pierce the night, and I will rise among the saints, my gaze transfixed on Jesus' face. Oh, praise the name of the Lord our God. Oh, praise His name forevermore. For endless days we sing Your praise, oh Lord our God. Oh Lord our God. Oh Lord our God. Amen. Have a wonderful Lord's Day. I love you. God bless you.